We're going to get going with an incredible panel to discuss why some of the biggest CEOs are getting into Bitcoin. So we're going to talk about going all in, the CEOs that are sharing their journey of adopting the Bitcoin standard. Please join me in welcoming Simon Gerovich, the CEO of Metaplanet, a Tokyo Stock Exchange-listed firm that has garnered attention as Japan's answer to MicroStrategy due to its pioneering Bitcoin Treasury strategy, and it was the best performing equity of 2024. We'll also have Eric Semler, chairman of Semler Scientific, where he led the company to becoming the second U.S. public company to adopt a Bitcoin Treasury strategy. It now has the fourth largest Bitcoin Treasury, reflecting his contrarian investment approach and belief in Bitcoin as a superior store of value. And rounding out the panel is Andrew Kang. He is the Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer at Strategy, where he oversees the company's financial strategy and Bitcoin Treasury operations. With over 2 decades of experience in accounting, treasury, and capital markets, Andrew has held senior roles at financial institutions including GreenSky and Santander Holdings. This panel will be moderated by Shirish Jajodia. He is the corporate treasurer at Strategy, where he oversees the company's Bitcoin Treasury operations and investor relations, contributing to its position as the world's largest corporate holder of Bitcoin. And I'd love to know how they're buying so much Bitcoin without really moving the price, although it is doing well today. So let's welcome the panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so thrilled here to be joined by 3 visionary leaders who are shaping the future of corporate finance, not just by their regular corporate operations, but also using the Bitcoin digital assets integration into their key strategic business, and not just as a side bet, but also like as a core focus on their business. So from Semler Scientific, from Silicon Valley to Metaplanet in Tokyo to Strategy in Tyson's Corner, they have captured the global attention for not just accumulating more Bitcoin using their operations and cash, but also leveraging capital markets to acquire more Bitcoin. So with that, we're going to dive in. What lessons have you guys learned from each other's operations and each other's Bitcoin strategies, and how has that influenced your own strategy? Let's start with Eric.
Okay, that's pretty simple. I would say with Strategy and Michael Saylor, it's about just religiously adhering to his playbook and staying laser focused. And for Metaplanet, we should have launched this in Japan.
Obviously, we're all standing on the shoulder of giants, so we owe a lot of respect to what Strategy has done. And obviously, Strategy has built a playbook for companies around the world to follow, so it's made it very easy for others to do so. So it's been very inspiring. Eric, you and I were on stage together in Nashville about a year ago, as the first 2 companies really to adopt a Bitcoin strategy. So that's incredibly exciting and very inspiring, and very happy to be here.
Too. Thank you, bud.
So to your point, Simon, I feel like this may be like the alumni class of Bitcoin for corporations, because about a year ago, we were all in Nashville, and we had obviously, Strategy had already, begun its journey and was well into that. Metaplanet, you were, getting organized. And, I think about, I was telling you earlier, Simon, it was very powerful during your presentation where you showed the progress you've made over the last year, just through 2 photos of your shareholder meeting 1 year ago and this year. And so, for me, I think, from your example, we've learned that there is global outreach and global interest, right? So it's not just a US-based strategy that our company has executed on. There's a lot of ways that other geographies, other countries can really embrace this and be extremely successful. Eric, for Semler Scientific. I recall when we met last year, you were probably still struggling with getting it started, right? I think you were right at the cusp of getting regulatory, or in the process of getting regulatory approval, really launching the initiative. And I look to where Semler is now, and you're the fourth largest corporate treasury. So from my perspective, when I think about Semler Scientific, it's about persistence and conviction and just staying the course. So first off, thank you guys for being here, and I think we can all learn from not just strategy, who's been doing this and helping pioneer, but also for everyone who wants to follow, and who may be thinking, maybe it's too late. It's not too late, right?
Great. So everybody's wondering these days, we started off 5 years ago as the only company, or strategy, as the only company with Bitcoin on balance sheet. Year ago, there were maybe like dozen companies, and this year now there are 70 plus publicly listed companies with Bitcoin on balance sheet, holding over 700,000 Bitcoin, close to $70 billion. So how do you see the emergence of these new companies coming to the space? And do you see them as partners in validation, or do you see them as like competitive pressure?
Good question. I see a proliferation. I think it'll mostly happen with smaller companies. I think it's going to be a more difficult hurdle to get large, very healthy, growing companies to do this. But I think that will happen as well. But it's good. There are going to be a plethora of smaller companies who can continue to do this. I think there's kind of this lifeline concept that for many companies, they need to kind of get out of the rut that they're in, if they're zombies and so forth. And Bitcoin provides that kind of that electrification that their stock needs. And so I really welcome that. I'm a huge believer in proliferation. I think it's great for Bitcoin. It's great for us. I'm glad that we were early. It's a great feeling to be kind of a pioneer in an early mega trend, which is that's very emotionally and financially rewarding. And I find it kind of that Simon and I have this cosmic connection, that we were both kind of planning to do this at literally the same time. We never met each other, so it's kind of interesting that played out that way. But I still think I would love to see next year that number really exponentially increase.
Simon?
I think in the traditional world, it's a dog-eat-dog world. Everyone's trying to compete and one-up each other. But the brilliant thing about the world of Bitcoin is we're all in it together. And it doesn't matter if you happen to be the company that buys it after the next person, you have a common vision in mind. And so, we were inspired by strategy and began the execution last year. And now, certainly in Asia, we're being approached all the time by other companies looking to have conversations, looking to understand the playbook, looking to understand what the pitfalls might be, how to explain to their boards, who to surround themselves with to ensure that there's an easier path forward. And so I think this is just the beginning. This is perhaps in the Japanese context, say, the beginning of the tidal wave of more and more corporations around the world adopting Bitcoin. I think it'll be irresponsible for companies not to look at Bitcoin and not to purchase Bitcoin on their balance sheets. And time will tell which ones are the ones that come to the table last.
I would echo all those points. I think the space we live in, Bitcoin, is very much a family, and someone might say that a new entrant is competition. I think we're still at a point where we want more people to adopt this journey and put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. I think that more people doing it gives us validation, gives us momentum. We have more advisors and partners that are helping companies think about these things. And to me, it's like, we're still in the rising tide lifts all boats phase. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned earlier, it's still early. And it's interesting, the amount of interest that we're getting now versus a year ago or 2 years ago has been amplified significantly. And within the past year, I think, being in the position we have been in, we've got a lot of inquiries from other corporates, other executives, and in my role specifically, other CFOs that are asking more questions. I would say even this week, at this conference, I've gotten several questions of, hey, this CFO would like to talk about this. This public company is interested. So I think we all collectively agree that, more is better. And so, I look forward to it. I welcome it. I think there's enough space for everyone. We have 70 plus public companies adopting Bitcoin. To Simon's point, that's still too small. I say that by the end of the year, we'd like to double that.
At least.
At least, not more.
So turning to capital markets, starting with strategy, you pioneered novel ways to accumulate more Bitcoin, starting with convertible debt, different types of convertible debts, equity financings, ATM financings, and structured notes, and now preferred equities. What next from here, and how do you continue to innovate to continue your goal of acquiring more Bitcoin?
I think it's, should I go ahead? You want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I think it's just a combination of those things you mentioned. I think that you have to use them when they make the most sense, each one of them. We've done a convertible debt offering, which was very accretive for us, created a very good yield. And we also have a very large ATM. We just got authorized for a $500 million ATM. So we will tap those when necessary. There's potential to go back to the convertible markets for more capital. But I think the ideal one is the preferred market. And for people out there who are considering this strategy, if you start out at a smaller size, it takes time to get there. There's a lot you have to do, and to get to the point where you can do a convertible or you can do a preferred. It's not like something you can just call somebody up and they'll put it together for you. So that there's an incremental kind of scale building process that enables you to kind of get to the next level of financing. And I'd say that, from a yield perspective, a creative perspective, getting into that preferred financing world would be ideal.
Simon?
I think the brilliant thing that strategy recognized was that there were infinite pools of capital around the world looking for exposure to Bitcoin. And up until strategy came around, the only way to get exposure to Bitcoin really was buying Bitcoin itself. Many investors, professional investors, institutional investors can't buy Bitcoin. And so recognizing that there are different risk-return profiles that different investors are looking for, being able to target exactly what that group of investors are looking for and offering them something they need is I think, the brilliant part of the strategy. So we're just in phase one of our current growth. We're executing the equivalent of an ATM in the Japanese context. There's no ATM that's available. So we've come up with a moving strike warrant program, which ultimately results in the same thing. We end up raising capital through the public markets. We also want to have as many tools as possible in our toolkit. And CBs is a logical next step, although I personally have some qualms about it. One must make sure that the investor that buys your CB is one that is, I think, aligned with the future and not just trying to capitalize on your volatility. The preferred instruments which strategy has launched, I think, are incredibly interesting for us in Japan. Japan is yield starved. Imagine you put $1 million in the bank for a year, you're lucky to make $100 in interest. And so if you offer them a structure where they can earn 3, 4, 5, 6%, they'd bite your arm off.
I think for strategy, we've communicated a lot on how we think we can continue expanding the funnel. I think our goal is to find new pockets of capital. We've been able to demonstrate that with the preferred equity offerings we've done earlier this year. Michael talked about, the iterations and the R&D we do to think about those new types of initiatives. So we will certainly do more of that. I think led by Metaplanet's, great example of the success in Japan. I think, we will look to see how strategy can be a bigger player in the global sort of markets outside of the US. I think that, one big unlock for us in finding new capacity and raising additional capital in the next year is around the financial framework, the corporate finance standard for Bitcoin that Phong talked about earlier, and really advancing that to be able to create the unlock around how investors view our credit, how shareholders understand how we generate value through our Bitcoin acquisitions, through the various vehicles that we have today. I think we will add more to that toolkit as well. But I really think, one of the areas that we addressed with the preferred equity offerings is the enormous universe of fixed income investors that are still largely untapped. So I think through that education, through some more innovation, I think there's a lot more work for us to be done.
Yeah. So Andrew, can you talk a little bit more about, we have different securities now. Strategy has different securities across different spectrum of volatility and risk reward. So how does that play into addressing different types of people, and what are the challenges in kind of expanding the size of those instruments?
So I think I alluded to it in sort of our fixed income universe, right? Like there's just today a pretty distinct disconnect between how investors and rating agencies think about our underlying credit. Once that potential gets clarified, I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of interest. I think hopefully it'll pave the way for others as well. And so, there's just a core, fundamental principle of this new asset class, this new commodity that exists that we are educating on. So that's one way, right? Just inherently educating and expanding the understanding of how people can view our balance sheet relative to our capital structure. And we're significantly undervalued in that perspective today. I think about, another area we've been highly successful is also in the convertible bond market, as Semler has as well. That is a much smaller market. And last year, Strategy was the largest issuer of convertible bonds in that entire ecosystem. I think what we recognize there is a lot of appetite, but there's more investors that could get interested in that type of instrument as well. So it's addressing the existing sort of system, but bringing more Bitcoin focus, people that want Bitcoin exposure into the already existing environment, instruments out there that I think will continue to help us expand. So, education on credit fundamentals and expanding investor bases however we can.
Makes sense. And so from Eric and Simon, your perspective, how do you view fixed income in your strategy, and how do you see that, like how we are working on it? And the great thing is when Strategy launched each of these initiatives, we had to go through a lot of first-time hurdles in terms of working with always like in the traditional finance world, the bankers, the lawyers, and to come up with innovative ways to find ways to be able to launch a new security, new product. So how do you see that applying directly in your context? And do you just adopt it easily, or like any challenges that you come across with respect to your own companies?
I think, you'd be a fool not to kind of try to follow what you guys have done. So I think that you've kind of laid for all of us, we're so fortunate that you've kind of laid that out. And I kind of described Michael yesterday as this guy who's leading a Peloton bicycling team. He's braving the elements, he's setting the pace, and we're in the back just, fueling up behind him and supporting him, but he's really the groundbreaker. And so I think that it's much easier for us once you guys have broken into those markets. It's doing our convertible, for example, was so much easier because of the work you had done in that area and the success you had, that when we met with convertible investors, it was like very quick and easy type meetings, a lot of interest, substantial over subscription to the offering. So, and I think a lot of that has to do with what you guys have had the success you've done. So, so I think that our like the holy grail for us is to tap into the fixed income markets. I think those are incredibly creative and attractive to us. And I think it just takes time. I think you have to, grow and get bigger, grow your Bitcoin holdings, and reach a level of scale where you can, just do what you guys have done. So I think it's there. It's just a question of time and scale.
And Simon, how about you? Operating in Japan, what are the specific considerations if somebody were to, enter the Japanese market, or cross-country, like if you were launching something in the US market? How do you get through those hurdles?
I mean, Japan is an incredibly regulated market, but when compared to the US, I think it's probably no worse. Every market has its own unique attributes. So I think anyone in the room who's looking to execute the same strategy just needs to understand what the local regulatory environment is. The one thing that we did in Japan to kick off our capital raising last year was a rights issue, which in the traditional concept is only done by companies that are desperate in need of cash and a negative thing. But in retrospect for us, we think it was probably the number one best thing that we could have done. We had roughly 15,000 shareholders fill out 50 pages of documents to subscribe, and they sent in their check, and at the end of that, they all became shareholders. And because they gave us the money themselves to buy Bitcoin as opposed to buying shares in the market, that created a connection, which is rather incredible. We're looking at doing a preferred issuance at some point, but the hurdle there is you have to convene a shareholder meeting first, which has a whole host of headaches and time considerations. You have to update your articles of association to allow for a new class of shares. And once you do that, then you can move forward and do that. So these are all things that we have kind of in our mind going forward. But for us, I think right now it's really executing the equivalent of our ATM. The Japanese regulator now has become incredibly friendly. So the first time we proposed issuing shares to buy Bitcoin, the response from the regulator was, why would you sell shares to buy Bitcoin? It's not your core business. Is this dilution good or bad? And so it's a process of education. Being able to say that there's a huge US public company that has done this and has a track record of executing has been really helpful. So I think, around the world, as people come up with creative structures to raise money to buy Bitcoin, we can all borrow from those experiences.
Yeah, so I think one of the ideas here could be that like Strategy initially put out our playbook and open source the playbook for others to follow. And a lot of companies are adopting that. It may be very interesting to have country by country playbooks as well, because you guys are all the first companies of those countries adopting Bitcoin Treasury company strategy. While it's all public, but then it's not very obvious to the companies maybe in the country or other countries if they are looking to enter any other country's broader market, to tap the capital. So I think it could be really interesting to develop country by country playbooks. That's a call to everyone in their respective countries. And I think that would be very useful for other companies to look at. So switching gears to more operation, non-treasury side of the business, how do you see the balancing of your non-treasury, but non-Bitcoin operations versus your regular like software, tech, healthcare operations? So starting with Andrew, can provide your views?
We have our non-treasury operations, our software business, and in fact, many of us are here adjacent to this conference to also be here for our software business. It's been around for a long time. It's been an extremely successful business over the years. It actually carries the weight of our employees, that contribute to the entire enterprise. I would say that we've maintained a core focus on that business. We are relentlessly trying to innovate in that as well. Hopefully some of you heard some of the AI innovations we're building into our BI product at this conference. If you're able to, I know we talked a little bit about it at the main keynote. Still full force ahead on that side of the business. I think one important piece in our journey is in the past year, we have really come together as an enterprise. And what I mean by that is, historically, we sort of kept the two businesses and the mindsets somewhat separate. Like, if you're on the software side, focus on that. If you're on the Bitcoin side, focus on that. And there was some crossover that we had to address, but primarily it was, two sort of separate runways. In the past year, I think we realized there was a lot of importance in aligning the mindset and the culture around our business. And so late last year, I like to put it as we decided to orange pill the entire company. So it didn't matter if you focused on Bitcoin. It didn't matter if you focused on the BI business. If you wanted to be at strategy, you needed to be aligned with the core principle of what we do with our balance sheet and the value that we're generating for our shareholders and our employees. So we, set out training courses, right? So every single employee at Strategy has to do Bitcoin training. And we've had, I think, 4 of them so far. And every training gets a little bit more technical. We dive into financial concepts. We started with the core principles of Bitcoin and the why. And so, for me, it's almost like, a transformation that we've undergone in the past year where, it's not just enough to be at Strategy and work on one side. You have to be at Strategy and work for the greater good of the whole. And, I think one of the big culminations of that was our rebrand from MicroStrategy to Strategy. That is like a biggest signal of we're not an old software business with a treasury business. We are one Strategy under a new brand, and our brand color is orange now. I think it's awesome. I've been walking through the halls and I see all of our software people wearing orange. And to me, that's just a reflection of, one team, one alignment. And I think at the end of the day, that helps the greater good of the entire company.
And Simon?
I think the blessing in disguise for us is we, had a core business that wasn't doing very well. And so we're not really focusing much energy into hotel development going forward. We still have one hotel remaining, and this is the hotel which we're in the process of converting into the Bitcoin hotel. And we think that's a really good strategic decision for us in our goal to onboard 1 million Japanese people into Bitcoin. As great as Bitcoin is, it's kind of up there in the ether, right? It's something you can't sometimes touch and feel, which is required for some individuals to get comfortable with Bitcoin as something to own. So the Bitcoin hotel will be a place that has a Bitcoin museum. There'll be a Bitcoin art gallery, but really just a space for our shareholders and those who are curious about Bitcoin to come and spend time and learn and meet others. We also have the license for Bitcoin Magazine in Japan, and we think that's a wonderful way to also onboard people through education. But everything we do now is very much focused on Bitcoin. We think of ourselves as the Bitcoin-only company. We will accumulate as much Bitcoin as we can over time, and everything that we do around that core purpose is also Bitcoin.
Yeah, the question of balance is an interesting one because I'd say maybe more than the rest of us here, we're still very committed to healthcare and saving lives and building our medical business. But that business just moves at such a slower pace of development versus Bitcoin that Bitcoin has become, we're a Bitcoin first company because it's where most of our value resides. We were actually a medical version of MicroStrategy and Strategy and Metaplanet between 2016 and 2021. Our stock went up 136-fold. And when we had a $1.2 billion valuation, we were, I think, 13,500%, probably the world's best stock in that time frame, based on one medical device that we still have that we're now applying to some new vascular diseases. They just take time to develop. There's obviously the potential that we're addressing even larger TAMs than we were before. So, but it's just going to take time. But as that's happening, Bitcoin just becomes bigger and bigger for us. And maybe, we hope the healthcare business can move the needle if it really takes off like it has in the past. But that balance is really being threatened by Bitcoin.
Makes sense. An observation on the pace of raising capital is that if any other companies, non-Bitcoin standard companies, when they were raising capital, they raise a couple $1 billion, it's not the issue of raising this capital, it's more about the deployment of the capital, which is more challenging for these companies. And what has happened with Bitcoin is if any traditional companies are acquiring any financing and raising some capital, they take 2 years to deploy the capital and multiple years to earn return on those capital. So it's a 5-year cycle. With Bitcoin, that deployment cycle has now gone down from 5 years to like 5 days with respect to strategy. We deploy it in a week and we're ready again to raise more capital. So question for Andrew is then, is there a limitation of the size that you can grow, and how much Bitcoin can you acquire, and how does that play into the relative size of the operation business versus the Bitcoin treasury?
No limitation to how big we can grow.
That's a question that people think about. So,
no, I think our strategy really is, in terms of the two components, I think we have a lot of room to grow both. I think to your point, the Bitcoin strategy is one that is, on hyperspeed, so to speak. And, we've done certain things to bring that speed forward in terms of faster earning cycles. And what I mean by that is, weekly 8Ks. And that was a bit of a transformation for us at the beginning of the year. I think our transparency allows us to grow faster and adjust to that pace. We have our website up now that many of you have seen that, gives 15-second updates on our metrics and our results. And so from the Bitcoin side, I think, the pace and scale and the speed is reflected on how we've innovated on transparency and investor relations. I don't think there is a limit to how fast we can do that or how much we can grow. As I mentioned earlier on the software business, it's something that, I would say we have every aspiration to grow that as big as we can. It's been a very steady business for the last, 30 years. I'd like for that software business to be just as big as the Bitcoin business over, a period of time. And Eric, to your point, right, that doesn't happen as fast in that operating function. But, we're here innovating, and, I'd love for the software business to be 10 times the size it is today. So short answer is no limitations. We're pushing on all fronts.
Yeah. And we talked about the Bitcoin standard KPIs, and strategy devised the KPIs, and then we talked more about it, and Fong gave an elaborate presentation about it. So from other companies' perspective, how do you see the importance of those KPIs in your investor communication, and how that has changed the perception of your investors in your communication? Do they find it more useful? Do you have to educate them a lot? How does it go?
I mean, education is critical. As we get larger, the types of investors that one needs to approach are institutional of larger scale. I think the metrics that they have to value companies are using the traditional tools. And so strategy has come up with wonderful KPIs that we've now adopted as well. And in all the communication that we have with our investors, we talk and educate about how these KPIs work. The brilliant thing about these KPIs and being transparent on your website, we have a similar dashboard now on our website, is that we can share on a real-time basis all the metrics that are important to investors. Having come from the traditional world, you trust, if you invest in a hedge fund, you trust the statement that you receive from the prime broker. Prime broker says, yes, I have $150 million of shares of this and that, but you have to trust that person providing the document to you is being honest. If you have it in a public dashboard, the things that might be buried in a financial statement are now front and center. And so I think it's imperative, it's critical that we continue to build on these KPIs. There's so many new KPIs from your earnings announcement, so I need to spend some time going through them all.
We'll take some time.
Yes, we need a bit of time to adopt them one by one. But I think there's no other way than to come up with a new framework for the traditional investment community to understand companies like ours.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think that we're doing the live dashboard too, but we also have this kind of real-time feedback on social media from our shareholders. So we kind of get a real good feel for what they think of these KPIs. And I think people are particularly focused on yield. And that, I think, has been embedded as a really critical metric to focus on for all investors, institutional and retail. But I think I think these metrics are incredibly valuable and pertinent. But I think that they just need time to kind of, to marinate so that they can be proven out. I think there's still kind of a little bit of skepticism about how sustainable some of these concepts are because they're working now. Why are they going to work in the future? And earnings multiples are really based on kind of this constant, consistent compounding concept. And the longer that we can continue to show good metrics, the more I think they become credible and kind of, the Overton window shifts and they become more mainstream.
I would just add that I think the financial framework and the metrics and the KPIs is we're really early in that, and we constantly think about how we can communicate better and more transparently. To me, it is a tool for our existing investors and our shareholders to have better transparency. I do think it's an amazing tool that is becoming bigger and more front and center in terms of how other companies can also evaluate their decision of whether or not to adopt a Bitcoin standard or not. Before, it was a bit opaque. It's like, oh, we can buy some Bitcoin and, it's all reflective on Bitcoin price. And maybe there was, a bit of a vacuum in terms of how you could forecast valuation and accretion and gain and earnings off of it. I think that the tool is dual-fold. One is it allows your current investors to have a better understanding, but hopefully through conferences like this and discussions like this, it allows corporations, CFOs, treasurers and finance departments to say, okay, if I applied this to not having a Bitcoin standard today, but if I apply these concepts to potentially adopting a Bitcoin standard, it could help push people to do that as well. So I think there's a dual benefit there.
Yeah, and from a legal perspective, and lawyers may say they are all not the KPIs. So there are some KPIs and there are some metrics. So I want to put the disclaimer out. But then other than that, I think it's interesting to see more and more companies adopting those KPIs and seeing the importance of those KPIs in communicating their story. I think it will be also interesting if these companies start asking their bankers when they bring a new transaction to them, like calculate all these KPIs, and then they can compare all the options. So I think it will be a good exercise for all the bankers and lawyers to get familiar with this. And then we'll see broader education and the application of the importance of these KPIs. And now, so getting to a final question here, what advice would you have for other companies, either in your sectors or cross sectors or your country, other countries? Like, what advice do you have for other companies to learn from your strategies, to follow your footprint? And like, how do you see this evolving and playing out over the next 2 to 4 years? Eric?
I'd say listen to Mike. He's got the goods and he knows better than all of us. So I would listen to him closely. I think that's how I converted my board. I had them listen to a lot of Michael Saylor's preachings about zombies, and that was very convincing and persuasive to them. I spend a lot of my time when I'm not doing this and meeting with public companies. I'm an investor in mostly technology and media companies, and when I'm not here, I'm meeting or on a call with a lot of public companies, and there are so many that I will ask, what are you doing with all that cash on your balance sheet? And it's easier when they're not doing well. Obviously, if you ask Duolingo or, why are you not taking your $800 million of cash and buying Bitcoin? They're like, what are you talking about? Where business is on fire, But if you ask maybe a Zoom Communications, which is, not growing much, facing tons of competition and has, more than a third of their market cap in cash, and they're making $2 billion of free cash flow a year. I think that those types of companies need to be pressed. I think guys like me who have access to them through my own investing as a portfolio manager should do that. And that's what I do. I actually on X, I have this thing called the zombie zone where we we call out companies that should adopt.
That's great analysis.
Yeah, we call out companies who we think should adopt the Bitcoin Treasury standard. And because I do this on a daily basis in my regular job, I see so many opportunities.
Simon?
I've got a few points. The first is to have courage and conviction. And so if the company doesn't have a leader that believes in Bitcoin and believes that it can be transformational for one's balance sheet, then it's not going to work. The second is don't listen to your lawyers or your consultants. Ask ChatGPT. I was inspired yesterday by that. It can do a much better job of telling you what you can and can't do. And then I think finally, you want to surround yourself with a board and advisors that believe in the common vision. If they don't, then ask them to step down. Stack your board with people that believe in the vision, that you need to have a push and a pull there. But if you have people that are always standing in the way of you wanting to move things forward, then it's just not going to work. But I'm feeling more optimistic than ever that this is the tipping point. And as we just said, by the end of the year, maybe twice as many public companies or 4 times as many public companies around the world adopting the same.
I think my advice is very consistent, right? We started this conversation around, the progress that is made in the past year. I think the examples are clear, right? Like if you adopt a Bitcoin Treasury strategy, you can generate a tremendous amount of shareholder value. Bitcoin today continues to become more mainstream. We now have a more friendly regulatory environment. We have a lot of support from the government here in the U.S. I think there's a lot of tailwinds. There's a lot of underlying reasons why Bitcoin today is perceived in a much more favorable light than it was before. So don't be afraid of it. Learn about that core principle first, and then learn from our examples, right? You've seen charts of our performance, our collective performance over the course of the past couple of days. And it's tremendous. And at some point, we talked earlier about more companies adopting this, then you're going to have more examples of companies that are going to have that type of success. And so, my call to, maybe it's an advice, but maybe it's my call to action would be to, have teams, CFOs, CEOs, boards think about at any size too, right? Not just the zombie companies, not just the small corporates, but the Microsofts of the world. Think about how you can, bring more value to your shareholders, how you can create performance and success through Bitcoin that our examples have provided, and don't ignore them, right? Think about it, go do the homework, apply our Bitcoin corporate finance framework, and really understand it in a way that I think will, be pretty obvious at the end of the day.
Yeah, we saw the Microsoft case study in action yesterday, very elaborately laid out by Michael. And we see more and more bankers also participating in the ecosystem now. And one thing that is common in all the bankers is they always carry a pitch book. And they're always talking about different options and proposing different things to different companies. I think it would be great if they should just start presenting the case studies of all these Bitcoin Treasury companies and show this performance. Look at our website, strategy.com, if you want to download the performance charts and start building the case studies on all these companies, on the performance across any different time periods and what these companies have done, and have that section as a section at the back for all the companies they're presenting to. That will be really fantastic, and I think that will also generate a lot of prospects for those bankers, and we are here to educate those companies. So with that, I would like to thank our panelists and everybody else for joining here. It's clear that going all in on Bitcoin Standard, it's not just about hype, it's about courage, conviction, and vision. And the playbook for Bitcoin Standard companies is still being written, and you all are holding the pen. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.